President Trump challenges the Second Amendment, pledges to ban bump stocks, wants to raise the minimum age to purchase a gun, lambasts his attorney general, ignores top national security warnings, loses his fifth communications director, and his son-in-law / advisor is potentially using the White House as a gilded loan office, while we've learned that foreign governments have targeted him as an easy mark for manipulation. Did I mention there's an opioid crisis summit happening? This is nuts. And it's only Thursday. With me to discuss are Fred Hiatt, head of the Washington Post Editorial Board and our boss, and opinion writers Christine Emba and Molly Roberts, who's monitoring, as always, your comments online, so please send us your thoughts. We won't get to all of it, but let's start with the staggering testimony from Admiral Mike Rogers, the commander of the U.S. Cyber Command and director of the National Security Agency. He told the Senate Armed Services Committee Tuesday that President Trump has not directed him to go after the Russian cyber threat. Oh my God. Here he is answering questions from Elizabeth Warren.
What message does it send to Vladimir Putin that the United States has not fully implemented sanctions to counter known Russian cyber attacks?
More broadly, not just the sanctions, but more broadly, my concern is I believe that President Putin has clearly come to the conclusion there's little price to play here.
Bingo.
And that therefore I can continue this activity.
Yes.
Everything, both as a director of NSA and what I see on the Cyber Command side, leads me to believe that if we don't change the dynamic here, this is going to continue. And 2016 won't be viewed as something isolated. This is something will be sustained over time.
Fred, nothing communicates the seriousness of this situation more than the Admiral sighing and then putting his head on his hand. Is it... I'm sort of at a loss for words here because the United States was attacked. And here we have General here, the head of the U.S. Cyber Command, director of the National Security Agency, saying that the president hasn't authorized him to do anything.
It's staggering, and we don't like it when you're at a loss for words. I mean, this would be scary if it came from a critic of the administration. When it's coming from the administration's own cyber chief and basically head spy, and he's saying that the administration is not responding to an attack, it's essentially an attack on American democracy. Okay, I mean, there's two ways I think you can sort of undermine democracy. You can get in and change votes, or you can change people's faith in the vote and create doubts about whether the vote is trustworthy or not. And if you do either of those things, you have done incalculable damage. And the fact that Russia is continuing to try to do at least the second and maybe the first, and the guy who's in charge of responding is saying that the president is not giving me the orders to respond, it is dereliction of duty, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that is too harsh a call, Christine, to say that it is dereliction of duty. And also to add on to what Fred just said, we just went through a campaign where the current president of the United States kept railing about how the system is rigged. So this erosion of the faith in the electoral process started before he even got in the White House.
Yeah, honestly, I think this general's response was really all of us, just befuddlement, confusion, and total disappointment. This is the president, basically, like his one job. He has one job to make sure that, democracy, at least in America, is safe and something to respect. And he's completely abdicated that. And we did know that from the beginning. As you said, he was saying that the election was rigged. He was saying that the system was in trouble even before the election happened. And I think one of the things that we need to concern ourselves with now is asking why. And to me, I think that the reason is that any thought that Russians might have influenced the election, anything that makes the election seem like it could have been swayed or managed in his favor, casts some doubt on the legitimacy of President Trump's mandate and potentially election. He does not want to even entertain the idea that he is not in the role that he is in because he deserves it, when in fact many of the American public would disagree.
You know, Fred, let me come back to you, because what does it say about the Republican Party? I'm old enough to remember when the Republican Party was anti-Russia, was about national defense at all costs, was about protecting the United States from foreign invaders and from all sorts of influences, and yet there's nothing but crickets coming from the Republican-controlled Capitol Hill.
Right. And I mean, that when job one is, it's, I mean, not just defend democracy, but defend the country against foreign enemies, right? I mean, that is, if there's anything else, the president could do nothing else, and the Constitution is, and the fact that the president's not doing that and the Republican Party almost unanimously is silent about it is scary. That partisan concerns seem to be taking precedence over that. I mean, you know, in fairness, you have seen the Senate step up a couple times and pass Russian sanctions bills, which the administration has.
I was going to say, they can pass the bills, but if the president doesn't do anything.
Right.
Right.
I mean, you know, some of this is hard for Congress to do. You need a president to act, but certainly you would like to see, you know, as we've written in editorials, you'd like to see the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader stand up and say, we want a stronger response.
Country over party, to boil it down. Molly, you're looking at me.
I am. On Facebook, Irv Wengrow says, all these developments and the cozy relationship the president has with the GOP congressional leadership just reinforces my belief that the potential danger of one party having control of the White House and both houses, and potentially the Supreme Court, is real now, and what the average voter will understand this fall, if not in 2020. I do think we're seeing the cozy relationship. You're talking about people on Capitol Hill not standing up, not just in what are we going to do concretely to stop Russia, but in the investigation of how this happened in the first place, with the Trump administration pleading executive privilege on everything, and then the people on Capitol Hill kind of cleverly getting to use that, the Republicans, as cover for, oh, we are asking these questions, they're just not answering them, but then not calling them on it when they say, I can't answer.
No, so you're talking about the Irwin was his name?
This is Irv.
Irv, sorry, Irv. But I like
Could
your
be
use.
Irvin.
So Irv, I like your use of the phrase cozy relationship, because it's a nice segue into this next thing that I want to talk about. And it has to do with the fact that President Trump doesn't seem to care about the rule of law, right? So at a White House roundtable on Tuesday on how to prevent school shootings, Vice President Pence began discussing the concept of gun violence restraining orders, and Trump interrupted him. And well, I'll let him speak for himself.
Or might take the firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system. Because a lot of times, by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. He had a lot of firearms. They saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second.
What? I mean, what the current Republican president of the United States just said is what Republicans thought the Democratic predecessor, President Obama, was going to do when he was president of the United States. Explain to me, what was that?
I mean, well, first of all, as the president asked maybe just
explain to
a
us,
week and a half ago, is there no such thing as due process anymore?
Right, this is a process. I'm pretty sure it's not.
It's not due process. The thing
But
that struck
what was
me.
the context of that a week ago?
Yes, a week ago he was complaining that because men everywhere were being accused of sexual assault and their lives and careers were being ruined.
That was just last week?
Due process was gone and it was a disaster. And apparently we really need due process for men when it comes to gun owners. I guess, like, due process, like, what is that? Just take the guns first and ask questions later. It's interesting what Trump feels like he needs to defend, which is men, kind of avatars of himself, basically, versus guns, which presumably he says he's, the biggest defender of the Second Amendment, a great friend of the NRA. But that doesn't seem to be an issue particularly near to his heart, and he's swayed by whatever public opinion seems to say.
But we're talking about the Second Amendment. He's talking about just doing away with the Second Amendment. I mean, this goes back, I mean, this is a Constitution. Fred, what does he really believe what he says, or do you think, I'm asking your opinion, I'm not asking you to get into his head, but how does the President of the United States say, screw the Second Amendment, we don't need to worry about that?
I mean, you know, the question of what did he believe yesterday with all this stuff where he seemed to be agreeing with Democrats and maybe taking on the NRA. Of course, it reminded a lot of us of a similar conversation about the Dreamers a few months ago,
Exactly.
where he said, I have a great heart and I want to, you know, I'll take the heat. You just come up with an agreement, bill of love. And then when the time came and there was a potential compromise, he sabotaged it and
killed it.
Yeah. So, you know, I think everybody this time around is let's wait and see, and not taking this to the bank. But the fact that you know, due process can come later is consistent with a lot of cavalier attitudes he's had toward rule of law in a lot of contexts. And, you know, I mean, I think people who like us favor gun control have to be careful of not embracing it when it comes to the Second Amendment, because it's dangerous in any amendment. I mean, you know, I mean, we favor red flag laws, and there should be procedures for taking guns away from dangerous people, but there should be due process, and constitutional rights should be respected for every amendment.
Are you listening, President Trump? Go ahead,
I mean, kind of piggybacking on what you just said here, Fred, I find it alarming and a little bit confusing, but notable that the president does not seem to know how things work. Generally, like how laws work, how the Constitution works. He seems to just believe that he can like say a thing and it's true. When he changes his mind the next day, like that's also true, and like I'll just write this order and this thing will happen, or I'll just tell them to take the guns and that will fix the problem. That's just not how our systems work, any of them. And he's been president for over a year now, and one would think that he would have come to some sort of understanding or realization of what you have to do to get things done, to get bills passed, to get executive orders put into place. But somehow he's missed all of those lessons and is just holding forth for his TV public, I guess.
Didn't he say he wanted to ban bump stocks through executive order?
He did.
Like, can he actually do that? Do we know for sure?
I mean, we know he's calling for some things which his ATF has said we can't do.
Right.
And that's why Senator Feinstein earlier had said, no, we need legislation. Please, you know, come out for legislation. So I'm not sure about the bump stock.
So speaking of Senator Feinstein, nothing captured that meeting more than the picture that I saw in a rival publication of President Trump with Senator Feinstein seated right next to him. Look at the look on her face. This is a senator who's been in government for a very long time, who has seen it all, been through it all, and the look on her face is like, what? Santa Claus is alive! But as Fred said, we've seen this movie before, whether it was DACA or even last week with the Parkland students and talking all this stuff, and now where are we? So I think it remains to be seen whether Senator Feinstein's happy face will remain even by this afternoon. Now, President Trump's a businessman, as we know, and a family man, but those family ties are leaving the White House quite vulnerable. His son-in-law / advisor, Jared Kushner, lost a high-level security clearance Friday amid reports that officials in at least 4 countries tried to manipulate him. Both Democratic and Republican senators are suggesting downgrading Kushner's access might not be enough.
Given his repeated revisions of his financial situation, his contacts with the Russians and others, and reports about his conflicts of interest and financial entanglement, I think he has to review his situation. I think the president ought to ask him to leave.
We're dealing with extremely sensitive issues: diplomacy, military policy, economic development, environmental policy, which requires expertise, experience, and he doesn't, through no fault of his own, doesn't bring that to the table. But he's been given kind of carte blanche to roam around the region, sort of an ad hoc way negotiate, and that's not going to be successful in the United States. So.
This, as the New York Times reports that the Kushner family real estate company got 2 loans worth more than $500 million from companies whose executives met with Kushner at the White House last year. Fred, how can Jared stay?
Well, I guess if Dad asks him to stay, he can stay. I don't, part of this for me, Jonathan, is I used to be a foreign correspondent in parts of the world where it was normal for dictators to have their sons-in-law or daughters-in-law in office and doing business and getting government contracts. And they used to say, well, this is how the world works. And we would say, well, no, it's not how the world works in the United States. It's not how the world should work. Mm-hmm. And the fact that those people now can kind of look at us with this satisfaction and say, you see, we told you, you guys are no different than we are. It's really disturbing, and it really, for people who have, who try to say in other parts of the world, no, there is rule of law, nepotism is not the right way, to have this in the White House makes that a lot harder.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of the example that the United States was around the world for the respect for the rule of law is just completely exploded, just in that one man, in Jared Kushner.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of this last senator who spoke, but I think his assessment was both the most cutting and the most truthful.
Senator, was that someone tell me? Jack Reed?
Jack Reed.
Yeah, Senator
Jack Reed. Yeah, I mean, like, brings nothing to the table is like the Jared Kushner story. Basically, it was never clear what he was doing in the White House in the first place. His portfolio of things that he's supposed to do is both overly broad and uniquely too large for him. He's bringing peace to the Middle East, but also increasing tech innovation at the same time, even though he has no experience in either. Apparently all he did in his own business was throw his own family deeper into debt,
right.
which he still seems to be trying to finagle his way out of within the White House. I think it also just speaks to kind of the perhaps incompetence of the Trump administration in just hiring or bringing in, really, how can you really hire a family member? All of these people who serve basically to bolster Trump's opinion of himself and to make the White House a safe space for him and surround himself with comfort and do nothing else.
Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
I think, I mean, it's easy to be harsh about Jared and Ivanka, but I think I would say it's important to keep the focus on the right place, which is the president. And the problem is, if you have a president who doesn't respect government and who got elected calling it a swamp and who shows his disrespect by not appointing, ambassadors, and half of the State Department is still empty, and all these other important positions. And I mean, that's the problem. It starts at the top, and you need a president who understands that government servants are doing honorable work,
right,
and that government service is honorable work, and that it requires expertise, and experience is valuable, and that's where the problem is.
Right. It starts at the top with a president who, let's be honest here. Jared's gotten his security clearance taken away,
right.
But we all know what's going to happen. It's going to be like this. I'm President Trump. Here, Jared, just take a look at that.
Well,
Take
he
some notes
already
and-
was seeing things that he wasn't supposed to be seeing with the interim clearance because President Trump was showing them to him. So yes, Trump says, "Oh, it's up to Kelly." He's right here in the room. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much it really is up to Kelly. How much we can trust that.
Yeah, we got to turn to another person in the cabinet who is like being flamethrowed by the president, and that's Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who President Trump lashed out at on Tuesday for not using the Justice Department to more aggressively pursue perceived Trump critics. A day before, Sessions said the Justice Department's Inspector General would look into alleged abuses of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. Now, DOJ is traditionally independent from the executive, but President Trump doesn't seem to want to follow that lead. When I interviewed former Attorney General Eric Holder on Tuesday asking him the question about whether didn't he protect President Obama, or does President Trump not have a fundamental understanding of what it means to be AG. Here's what he said.
He's got a fundamental misunderstanding of both the role of the Attorney General and the role that I played in the Obama administration. There's kind of a basic problem there. I didn't have to protect Barack Obama, okay? His campaign wasn't colluding with the Russians. We didn't have to worry about obstruction of justice. And the other thing is that President Obama understood that the best justice departments are those that are independent of the White House.
So the thing here, though, is it seems as though President Trump has this idea that the Attorney General is supposed to be his lawyer, as opposed to being the lawyer for the United States, and that his or her highest priority is the Constitution of the United States, right?
Right. I mean, I think this speaks to the larger problem that I think has been threading through our entire conversation today, which is that the president does not seem to realize what the president is supposed to do. He's not supposed to protect himself. He's supposed to protect the Constitution and this country. All of these offices, all of these cabinet members are not put into place to be like the president's supporters and cheerleaders. They have jobs. Their responsibility is to the country, not to him. I mean, he's supposed to ask for advisors who give him advice on how to help the country, not to support him as family members. And there's this disconnect that keeps happening between what President Trump thinks he's doing in the White House, which is sort of creating his own very flattering world in which he's president and people bow to him, and what we actually want a president to do. And that just keeps happening, and I think it's going to continue.
And the rage against Sessions, though, I think can get Trump in hot water, like we're seeing. I mean, we're learning now that Robert Mueller's doing these interviews where he's trying to figure out, was there a pattern to when Trump was considering over the summer firing Sessions, and was it with the deliberate goal of getting someone in place who would protect him better? So then going out and writing a tweet like this that essentially says, I want someone to protect me, that makes the pattern look even clearer. It's just, can he not control himself, or does he have a strategy here? Or
No.
both, maybe? I have no idea.
He can't control himself. He has no strategy. Fred?
Well, I mean, a president is entitled to help set policy for his own Justice Department, right? The Attorney General works for the president, and if a president wants to say, I think our priorities should be fighting drugs, or should be not fighting drugs, it should be fighting organized crime, that's, ordinarily you wouldn't communicate that by tweet, but but you're entitled to do. But what you're not entitled to do is say, I think you should, go after this person and not this person, and why aren't you prosecuting that person?
Prosecuting that person, my political enemy, which is something that's also like un-American and unimaginable.
Speaking of what tin pot dictators thought that everybody does, and we used to say, no, we're different. We don't operate that way.
Right. Now, you have someplace to go, so we gotta wrap.
There's no place I would rather be.
He's so good to us. Finally, President Trump loses Hope. Hope Hicks, that is, one of his most loyal allies, who's been with him from the start of the campaign, and his 5th communications director. Why, Hope? Why? Why? I mean, why was she there to begin with? I mean, we've been talking about the fact that he being the president, needs to have sort of a safe space and surrounded by cheerleading, fawning advisors and people around him. But if Senator Jack Reed can say what he said about Jared Kushner coming to the table with no qualifications, can't the same be said about Hope Hicks in the role of White House communications director? Come on, Fred, push back.
I dissent. Can I? I mean,
He has hope.
I have hope. I mean, I have to say, during the campaign, I was astounded that Hope Hicks, as communications person, was always responded in a professional way. When you had a question or an interview request or something like that, my experience was she answered it, pretty promptly and very politely. And I mean, you didn't always get the answer
that you wanted,
or the interview that you asked for, but that hasn't been my experience with everybody in this administration, but I always thought she was extremely professional, and I was amazed. I don't know how she did it, given the maelstrom around her, but I always thought she was quite professional in her job.
Did you find, given what
Sorry,
she told,
you're
given
No,
what,
I don't
yeah,
disagree.
honestly-
It seems like she was competent in a way that a lot of other people weren't. I don't know why she's there. It seems like she might really believe in him, and it's hard to kind of wrap my head around that when she has come across as pretty good at her job, and you disagree.
It's also no. I think she's good at her job. I think it's notable that she's like the one person who has not appeared on stage, who's not like constantly out there, sort of like showing herself off. I think it's kind of weird and sad that we're like, oh, Hope Hicks, this 29-year-old communications. She's like my age. Like she's so competent. She was the one competent person in this White House, this communications director, and now she's the 50th person to resign or be
So maybe you'll be
fired.
the next
I
communications
have to interrupt and get in one more Facebook comment, especially we were
Irv?
talking. No, this is
Irwin.
Steve.
Steve Irwin.
Whoa.
Oh,
So
yes, Steve.
we were talking about the role of a communications director, kind of. I think that this leads us to a question about our role too. So Steve Williams says, more fake news with emotions that cause blame and no respect. We need to come together, but you, the Washington Post, are doing nothing but giving your opinions to divide us more. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Grow up. Fred, what's the role of the opinion section that you helm?
Well, who was that from?
Steve.
Steve. First of all, the opinion section at the Washington Post is, as you all know, completely separate from the news section, and we don't really know what they're up to. They don't know what we're up to, and we're really a small part of the Washington Post. Our job is to provide opinions, and but I would say not destructive opinions. We try to provide constructive opinions. And one of the things that I think distinguishes the Post from a lot of publications is we really try to provide a wide range of opinion. Maybe not fully reflected on this panel today, but we have conservatives, we have liberals, we have writers who are sympathetic to the Trump point of view. We have writers who are very critical of Trump. We try to foster a debate and dialogue, which I think is important in a democracy.
And their opinions.
We all
Which
like
is,
Hope Hicks
you
and wish
know,
her well.
and I just want to say that this one thing. Well, two things. Let's not forget, Hope Hicks was on Air Force One with President Trump, cobbling together that fraudulent statement about the June 2016 meeting where all those Russians were, but it was about babies and adoption.
There you are, going negative
These are
again.
white lies.
Right, and I was about to ask,
lies
and all
matter.
that praise of her confidence and getting back to you,
I
did
was
you
talking
ever get a
about
sense
during the
that
campaign,
during the
right?
campaign,
Yeah.
do you ever get the sense that she told you white lies in terms of not coming through with interviews?
So, I didn't have any interactions with her on the Russia stuff, and I know she's been questioned about that at great length by the House committee and apparently by Mueller, and I certainly can't speak to, what her legal jeopardy may be. And look, we know that, or we've seen that people who work for this White House most of them don't tend to come out looking better than when they come out than they looked when they went in.
Right. Well, we've made you now 8 minutes late for whatever it is you have to go to, but thanks for being here, Fred. We're out of time, but not out of opinions. Sorry, Steve. So to keep up with us, go to WashingtonPost.com/opinions, and remember, oh boy, it's only Thursday.